Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed your lunch. We'll make a start now. So I'm going to introduce to you Juliet Ireland, who's from Auckland. I don't know Juliet, so I'm going to have to read the bio. Or you can turn to page 21 and read it yourself. But basically, Juliet is a health psychologist. She's got a vast experience in working with individuals, groups, and health professionals. And Juliet has spoken at some of our other patient forums before, and she's been fantastic, and everyone wants her back. So here she is. This session is going to be an overview of post-traumatic stress disorder in the healthcare setting. So I'm going to leave it to Juliet to explain more about that. Thank you. On here, but not on there. So. Yeah.
Just push every button on the break.
Well, welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you here, especially when at this very moment there's also some absolutely fantastic topics. So I really appreciate you coming. I also really hope you get something from what I'm going to talk about. This talk has changed a little bit from what I had intended to talk about, primarily because when I was thinking about it, when I was reading about this whole trauma in cancer, I suppose my thinking and my ideas came matured in a sense. So whilst I'm going to touch on some research, it's interesting because as you, in my field, research is often really problematic, but we'll touch a little bit on that. So I think it's also really important that before we get going, there's just a little bit of a warning about what we're going to talk about. So talking about trauma, listening to someone talk about it, thinking about it in relation to yourself or someone else you may know, may stir up some difficult thoughts and feelings. And it's really important to acknowledge. So if that happens, you know that is okay. So if that does happen, do what you need to do to make that okay. And I was thinking when I walked in this room is a perfect room to help with that. Because you can look out that window, you can tune out from me, you can look out that window and what a view there is. If you are at home on a live stream though, you don't necessarily might have the benefit of a beautiful view, but it's okay to step away and come back when you're ready. So I just think that's really important. The other thing is catch me at the end, or if this talk kind of resonates with you or touches on something, speak to one of the support services people, and they will certainly be able to either put you in touch with someone that can help or just be there to talk about things. So you'll notice that my slides aren't that jazzy. I often up today as we're going to start by setting the scene. So defining trauma and thinking about all the different ways that it's used. So thinking about words and phrases and things like that that are used to describe it. We're then going to cover what it may look like, what it may feel like by talking about some of the signs and symptoms and what people have told me that it feels like. Then we're going to focus specifically about trauma in medical settings and cancer-related trauma. And then we're going to finish on a bit of prevention and also on things that can help. So why do we need to talk about it? Why is this important? So there are lots of reasons, but what's really interesting is that trauma often goes really undetected. And we can understand why that may be, because in a healthcare setting, the body always takes precedence. And so there's lots of reasons why that needs to happen. But what we also know that more and more it is becoming awareness, acceptance, acknowledgement that other things are important as well. So the experience of being in healthcare, the emotional experience, and what we know is that we also need to care for that. So it's really important to talk about. So when you hear the word trauma, this is what I wonder pops up in terms of an image of what you may think trauma to be. So we have emergency room. And interestingly, in medicine, there is a specialty called trauma medicine. And there's probably a TV show with the word trauma in its title, focused on an emergency room situation. We also may think of trauma as in sort of accidents. So, something has happened causing trauma. We also can think about trauma in terms of a disaster, a natural disaster. We've often heard the word trauma associated with Christchurch and the years that have followed. I think possibly people's biggest understanding of trauma is also associated with combat. That's where a lot of talking about, especially this term PTSD. But it's also a really popular concept in the media. It's actually used quite a lot. And that can be really good, but when they're talking about it in particular ways without explaining it or defining what they mean by it, it can sometimes be problematic. So let's define it. So for our purposes today, when I say the word trauma, this is what I'm talking about. So some sort of distress following a distressing or disturbing event. So trauma is really complex though, and it's a lot more complex than this definition suggests. People will define it and describe it in lots and lots of different ways. I think the hallmark symptom of it is sort of that being constantly haunted by an experience or an event. And if we think about that, that's the way that our brains are trying to make sense of what's going on, to kind of repeat the event. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But humans, by our nature, find it really difficult to deal with something that doesn't make sense to us. We try and always make sense of something. And the nature of trauma means that sometimes we can't move beyond that. We're sort of stuck in it, stuck in the search for understanding. So these are sort of some of the words or terms or fancy ways of describing trauma. So we've got PTSD, which stands for posttraumatic stress disorder. And that was a term that sort of started gaining popularity in the 1980s. It has some very specific criteria and diagnostic things associated with it. We have medical trauma, which is trauma associated with illness or in medical settings. We have cancer-related post-traumatic stress, which is a more recent way of describing cancer-specific experience of trauma. So let's talk a little bit about PTSD. So PTSD, that term sort of was coined in the 1980s, and so it was added to the DSM, and the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and so that is where what we know, mental health diagnoses, specific things, that's sort of the guiding book on that, and there's various versions that came out. But in the 1980s, the DSM-3 actually defined PTSD for the first ever time. Previously to this, a trauma response had been given lots of different names throughout history, including shell shock, soldier's heart, combat exhaustion, war neurosis, combat fatigue, post-Vietnam syndrome, and also references can be traced back to ancient texts like the Iliad and the Odyssey and things like that. So definitions of PTSD have evolved and changed over time, but along with this has become a bit of an evolving and changing perception or acceptance of it. So PTSD, like other terms of emotional well-being or not well-being, anxiety, depression, things like that, even though I think we've come a long way in terms of people understanding them and seeing them as, just like any other diagnosis, there's still stigma associated with it. Maybe that's because it's something that can't be seen, and when something we can't see, it's actually quite difficult to wrap our heads around it. So I'm now going to flash up a number of slides that don't get too caught up in them. But so I mentioned before that this DSM place was the first time that PTSD had come about. So 5 years ago, the latest version of the DSM came out, the DSM-5. So what happened before that is the edition before had described PTSD in a really specific way that enabled lots of different kinds of events that could happen to someone to be described as PTSD. And that's where a lot of research and attention was brought to it. And then they decided to change it in the DSM-5. But one of the main changes is it used to be classed as an anxiety disorder, and that has now changed to having its own category. And I think that's really important because there may be people who experience it that don't have some quite clear anxiety symptoms. But the reason why I'm showing you this is because there's a couple of really key features that describe it. So one of the things which is really important is that you make a diagnosis, or you could experience PTSD by directly experiencing something or by witnessing something. And I think that's really important. The other thing is this thing called intrusion symptoms. And so they're things that's sort of about hauntingness. So things that pop into your head, and that could be a memory, a thought, a dream. So often the word flashbacks are given, or nightmares. But also that along with these thoughts or memories or dreams can come quite a significant response. in your body that was like the response you had in that particular event. The next thing is avoidance. So obviously if you experience something really unpleasant, why would you not want to avoid it? And so people with PTSD will try and avoid anything that reminds them of it because, you know, that's a really understandable thing. And then alongside that becomes particular ways of thinking and feeling associated with the event. So that's where some of these external symptoms or someone's behaviour may pop up and be really important. So that's kind of the official diagnostic criteria of PTSD. And so I think it's really important, but the other thing which I do think is really important when we're thinking about medical trauma or trauma associated with a specific illness like cancer, then having a diagnostic label isn't always useful, but there can be critical things about that experience that are really traumatic. So we're just going to move on and talk about medical trauma now. So medical trauma is simply trauma that results from a medical diagnosis or medical intervention. On the surface, that may be really easy to understand in terms of thinking about events like having a heart attack or a stroke or a medical emergency, something like childbirth, that it's quite an intense situation, or maybe a stay in something like an intensive care unit. So we can kind of, on the surface, understand why those sorts of things might be traumatic. However, it's also really important to consider that it's not always as simple as that. So what we know is that trauma in a medical setting will result from a complex interaction between the person and the environment, the staff, the diagnosis, and the procedure. So each of those things have characteristics that may influence the experience of an event. So these are symptoms that are often associated with medical trauma. You will notice, however, that these are also symptoms of lots of other things, like anxiety, like depression, like stress. But like we were talking before in that sort of diagnostic criteria, there are two things on that list that sort of pop up as sort of trauma things. And they are the nightmares and flashbacks or avoiding things. And so those are the sort of two telltale signs of trauma. So people will describe trauma in a medical setting in a number of different ways. And I think we'll talk about why some people may experience it and others don't, but also the experience of what it is for that person might be incredibly different and conflicting to someone else. So people will often talk about a specific event or a specific experience and having a reaction or having an experience that's like their life flashing in front of their eyes. That the world stopped at that moment and only that moment can exist. So people might say, I heard that word, and often that word might be cancer, or another word that indicates it, and I heard nothing else. People may also describe being able to describe in absolute minute detail about a particular event that happened, in so much detail that's not necessarily how you would usually remember an event. So for example, I saw someone once who could tell me the pattern on the tie of the doctor sitting in front of them, or the fact that the nurse had a particular piece of jewellery on. It wasn't particularly distinctive, but they would remember certain things. And that's sort of the brain's attempt at trying to lay down something to then try and understand it. Another way that people may describe it is actually not being able to describe it at all. So having absolute no memory of something happening. And it's other people that will tell them that something happened. Or people will also describe feeling incredibly withdrawn, that suddenly there's a big difference between them and the rest of the world, that the rest of the world is kind of shrunk over there and they're kind of in a row. So there's lots of different ways that people can describe it, and I think that indicates that it's an incredibly individual personal experience as well. So as I said before, that in a medical setting, there's a huge number of variables that can kind of be important factors. So someone's personal characteristics, staff, the environment, and the diagnosis or treatment. So the idea that someone can be traumatised in a place where healing things are supposed to happen can be incredibly challenging for people, especially to those people doing the healing. So if you think about that, that's a really hard concept for someone who is trying to do good, and then to sort of know or to accept that in that doing good, some harm might be done. And that's also the whole intention behind what happens in a medical setting might be really different to some of those situations that may cause a PTSD kind of reaction. So if we think about PTSD, that may result from things like accidents, natural disasters, as we've talked about, but also from things that have a harmful intention associated with them. So maybe an assault or a combat situation. And so what we know in the PTSD literature is when there's a harmful intention behind a traumatic event, then there's more likelihood that someone will experience trauma as opposed to an accident or a natural disaster. And so that adds a level of complexity to a medical environment where there's not a harmful intention, but sometimes harm may result. But when we know that staff have pure, mostly pure intentions, what that means is that the person then experiencing the event may find it a lot more difficult to speak out about it, or to speak about, I feel really vulnerable, and this is a really hard thing for me, because it's not that other person's fault or intention that any harm is caused. So that can be a real difficulty when we're thinking about trauma in medical settings, but it's actually really hard to say, hey, this might be something that I'm experiencing. So medical settings, as you will all be aware, have particular qualities that may enhance the development of the trauma response. So especially if a diagnosis is unexpected, it's a shock. Suddenly, you're being told information or something that you weren't expecting. Also, lots of procedures that happen are invasive, leaving you really vulnerable with physical discomfort. And the other thing, which I do think is really important, is things are being done to you. And you have to give up a sense of control in order for things to be done to you. But also what we know is there's privacy issues in hospital situation, or someone may also be confined to a bed or to a particular machine or something like that, and that can be a hard experience. The other thing often in healthcare, and I know you will all be aware of this, is often it can be really dehumanising. So you might be being talked about rather than being talked to. And I think though that's sort of changing culturally. But there's lots of sights and sounds and scents and temperatures and things like that in a hospital setting that give us a particular sensory experience as well. So I'm thinking about particular beeps. I don't know about you, but I can dream about an IV pump beep, and I'll wake up thinking, where is that? You know, there's a particular tone where it's on TV, and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, it's the same tone on TV than it is in real life. Smell. Yeah. Yeah. Or there are those particular things that to someone else, meaningless, to you, have a whole experience associated with them. There's also lots of unfamiliarity and frightening looking equipment and objects. And I don't know about you, but I was once in an emergency department and my friend, who is actually a nurse, she was like, oh, I've never seen this thing before, pulled it off the wall, actually physically pulled it off the wall and broke it. But, you know, she was curious to kind of find out what the scary looking object was. Now, she is familiar with the medical environment, so was kind of more curious than frightened, but it can be an incredibly frightening thing, looking at what do they do with that? Those sorts of things. The other thing which is really important about a medical environment is from the moment you even have an appointment before you walk in the door, someone else has a lot of responsibility for your life. So there's big things attached to it. So communication and trust are incredibly important. And finally, the other thing which I do think is really important in terms of thinking about trauma is that staff are incredibly familiar with the hospital environment. That's the place they choose to be in. You don't choose to be in there, in a sense. And it's really easy for staff to forget that it's not normal. It's not a normal environment. It's a normal environment, but it's not everyone else's. I would like to say no. I'd like to say we'd try to change that. Yes, but absolutely, they are difficult beasts to be in, aren't they?
It's like, no, you know, no sports to direct you where you need to go. And just, you know.
Yeah, even some places will think they call it wayfinding, and they'll design these amazing things about how someone gets from A to B without kind of actually testing it and working out that they've done it in the most complicated way possible. So the other thing which I think is really specified around cancer is that there's a number of specific things. So first of all, it's not a one-time thing. You know, we think about a diagnosis and treatment, or even watching and waiting. Lots of things happen over a really long period of time. So from even before someone's diagnosed, right through to the end of treatment and kind of thinking about that survivorship phase, there can be multiple stressful experiences that are repeated on a daily or weekly basis. The other thing is most treatments have some sort of aversive side effects, or even if they don't have aversive side effects, they are perceived to be that way. Often there can be disfigurement or dysfunction. And also, some of the treatments that are used can be really life-threatening. Cancer challenges our thoughts and feelings about life, the way that we think life should be, and also our mortality comes into focus. But also, you know, I'm always really aware of how much information people are just given. And so that's really complex because decisions to be made are really important decisions, and there's lots of information, and navigating that can be incredibly difficult. The other thing is that there can be a huge contrast between your private life and your life in a hospital as well. And so you might have a long stay in a hospital, you might be an inpatient or visiting someone lots of times, multiple visits, You have to reorganise your life. There's also a lot of fear about what might happen now, but also what might happen in the future, or what could happen. So it's easy to be exposed to a traumatic event a number of times. So maybe that avoidance is a lot harder. So what we know is that there's a number of risk factors around cancer-related trauma. So something that occurs is a risk factor. If someone receives complex and more invasive treatment, the longer someone has to stay in hospital, someone who might have previous trauma, because we all come into a diagnosis with a history of life. And so previous trauma could maybe be sexual and emotional abuse or other traumatic things that have happened. If there's lots of negative life events, someone has poor support. That is a threat to life or body in terms of functioning. If someone traditionally uses avoidance to cope with things, and some of the things that we use to avoid stress and things like that might be drugs, might be alcohol, might be food, things that we will use instead of kind of doing that emotional work around it. The other thing is, women are more likely to be have cancer-related trauma, and that's not because of anything else possibly than a reporting thing. Women are more likely to say, yes, that is me, than me. It's more comfortable thing for a female to do. And also, the younger someone is at diagnosis. So these risk factors don't mean that someone will get cancer-related trauma, but they may influence someone's the way someone adjusts to a specific diagnosis or event. So why then will some people experience trauma or a trauma response and others will not? I think it's a really important question.
You describe various types of trauma, but you haven't described a cancer-related trauma. I can identify with the reasoning and all that. But is there somebody who has had a cancer-related trauma?
So are you talking about an event that would happen in...
No, an event that would trigger an event through cancer, through cure of cancer, or the getting over of cancer, that is likely to bring on a PTSD reaction.
Well, I think there could be lots of things. It could be getting results. So sitting in a room being told you have cancer or a negative test result. It could be a particular procedure that happens. So whether it's a chemotherapy or a biopsy or something like that, it could be a hospital stay that in a period of time there's a number of different things that happen to culminate into a response. And so the thing is, it could be a huge amount of different things for different people. And that's a really important thing. So does that answer your question?
I just, is there any magic bullet to recovery from this, regardless of what it was?
Not a magic bullet, but there are things that can help. Yeah. And we'll get to that. So thinking about why someone may experience a traumatic response and why people may not, is what we know is that the same experience is not experienced the same by different people. So this is because we look at things through our own eyes, through our own worldview, but also that we interpret things in our own ways. So, and a good example of that is stress. What I find stressful is not necessarily what you find stressful. Some people find driving in traffic stressful, other people do not. So there's different ways of interpreting the same things. But also that our different interpretations will result in different emotional reactions. So if in a medical setting, if there are really complex interactions, then we're often making multiple interpretations about what that may mean for us, and we may have a variety of different responses. So that could lead towards or away from a traumatic response. We also all come in to the cancer world with different views about it. I think that we may not always have an accurate view of what it may mean as well, and that can be something that is involved in the response. But what we've previously done today is also talked that there's something about we're trying to make sense of an experience that's happening to us. And so if someone is really struggling to make sense of what it may mean or what it is for them, then they may be more likely to have a trauma response. And so what we know is that research will show that people with a higher fear of recurrence will report more trauma symptoms, whereas people who can say that they really understand what's happening to them will report lower trauma symptoms. We also know that there's lots of influence that staff have on trauma response and things like that, our communication styles. And you can all give me a list of experiences you've had where someone's communicated poorly to you and how that actually feels. If someone's not sensitive, or someone doesn't acknowledge the vulnerability that you're sitting with or have empathy for your situation, your response is a lot different, doesn't it? It feels very, very different in comparison with when someone is a really good communicator. If you don't have positive relationships with people that are doing things to you, then that is really hard then to hand over control to them, and it can feel awful. And so staff can have a huge influence, but also, the well-being, the emotional well-being of staff is incredibly important. And I think there's a lot more move towards acknowledging the well-being of staff influences the well-being of the people that staff interact. And so there's an acronym that we try and use with staff is watch your HALT, H-A-L-T. And watch if you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're late, and you're tired. Now, often you won't know if someone's hungry or not, but you could probably make an assumption if they're running late, they probably are hungry because they haven't had lunch. And you don't necessarily know if the staff member's angry or not, but all of those things become really important. So staff also have to be aware of where they are and their influence and things. So like we were talking before, there's lots of things in a medical environment that can kind of be quite critical in terms of the development of trauma. So smells and walking into a place where you haven't walked in before and you smell that smell and the whole experience comes flying back. Sounds like that beep, sights as well. So maybe particular colours. So purple is probably a colour that you're all familiar with, or yellow. And so you might see a particular shade of purple or yellow, and you may not be aware of it, but you may have a feeling associated with that colour.
Create something stuff. When I reflected hospital after I've been in the lot, it smelled so bad to me that I'd feel sick when I walked in, and I'd say to my sister, it smells awful. I would ask my mother, she'd say, well, yeah. So, but it doesn't, but the other woods don't smell like that.
No, they won't.
Okay, so you're creating it yourself?
No, that smell is there, but you're incredibly sensitive to it.
Okay.
Someone I sat next to asked me about this, she started with sense changes. It was really nice. We all enjoyed it.
Yeah. Or another thing that often people do with smells is you just on the tissue might have some things. But it's sort of like, I don't know how many people were here last night, but David's experience of doing different things in the room with different countries.
That was really good, wasn't it?
It's sort of mediating or changing the experience of that same environment time and time again. So what we also know is that when we're thinking about these intrusive thoughts or memories, that often that's the thing that we're avoiding because the thought is so unpleasant that we then want to avoid that thought. So if we're kind of around a smell, it's going to trigger a memory. That memory is really unpleasant, so we want to avoid the smell. And so the thing is, which is really hard, is often we can't avoid lots of these things. We're continuously exposed to these things. So in one way, that can be relatively good because it means you have to deal with it. In another way, it can be incredibly distressing and sort of lead to people completely avoiding treatment or visits altogether, which then becomes a problem. So, this can be a problem, first of all, because it's really unpleasant, and everything is so unpleasant already. Why do you need to have an additional thing that's unpleasant? But also, I think it's really important to think that now we are in the medical world, and it's sort of, I've seen it in my career from being someone who always has to bash your head against the wall to get anyone's emotional experience of something recognised, to there being a lot more acknowledgement of the importance of someone's psychological well-being. But like I was also saying before, if someone starts to avoid things because of this, it may impact on someone's outcome. They don't want to take a pill because that pill reminds them of something really unpleasant. They don't take the pill. Not taking the pill is actually a problem. So, a bit more positive news. These things are really good for protecting people. So having really good access to good support. So what that means is that someone's needs, they know where they can get support if they need it. Not necessarily just emotional support, any kind of support. Having a good support network and it being judged by you as good quality. Having clear information helps you understand and make sense. So even if that information is not the greatest information in the world in terms of what it means, knowing it is better to protect against trauma than not knowing it. Also, personal qualities like resilience, being optimistic and being open to things is a protective thing to trauma. So looking at really recent research, there's quite a lot of debate and controversy in the research about this whole trauma and medical and cancer. There's lots of variation in results. So most of the research in cancer has been done with people with breast cancer. So we don't know if that's the same as every other cancer. It's the most sort of studied cancer psychologically. But we don't know how that applies to other groups of people. Lots of the research is also done with really small numbers. So we don't necessarily know if that is true for a large sample. but also people will self-report. So study designs and things like that aren't particularly robust. But some studies will say that up to 80% of people will report trauma symptoms, and that these symptoms may fluctuate during the course of someone's illness experience, but will also decline at some stage. Earlier this year, a large study from Malaysia was published by a researcher called Chan. And it was really interesting because it received a lot of attention in the media because it was the first study looking at trauma and cancer that didn't use a particular diagnostic interview to look at trauma, that it was a really large sample that looked at multiple different types of cancer, and it also followed people for 4 years, so it's sort of been a really, really good study. What they found is that 6 months after diagnosis, 21% of their sample experienced significant trauma symptoms. At 4 years post-diagnosis, this had dropped to 6%. So what that says is maybe about a fifth of people, 20% of people may experience, symptoms of trauma that are important to acknowledge and do something about, but also that over time that decreases. What we also don't know is why those 6% still had it, and that could be because of lots of reasons, like we don't know the previous experience of those people and those sorts of things. But that's sort of the best study and the most up-to-date study, so that's important. Again though, it's not all bad. So this concept of post-traumatic growth or benefit finding is something that many people I see will experience. So what it sort of says is that there can be a benefit to a traumatic experience, that people don't return to the life they had beforehand, they return to a different life, and that life can have aspects that are better than it was previously. And so how this happens is that change will result from sort of someone processing the event or the events and making sense of it, making meaning of it. And so what we know is that often people will say, this has been a really hard experience, but without this experience I wouldn't have X. Or I now look at things like that, and that is better than it was before. So I think that's a really, it'd be great to be able to have that growth without having a traumatic experience, but that can be a good thing. What we know in terms of prevention is having really good psychosocial or mental health support as routine practice is a really good prevention and sort of screening for people's distress so it can be picked up and supported. That people, information's really good, and that we're actually thinking proactively about people's overall wellness, not just their physical wellness, and also that people have really good support mechanisms. So what we know is, and you may have heard it before in your life, someone saying to you, "Oh, just forget about it." That's the solution that people will often give you. Or they'll say, "Oh, have you got over it yet?" And you're like, So as we've discussed, your perception and you making sense of things is really important in the experience of trauma. So then simply forgetting about it is not helpful because you actually can't, it won't let you. So how do you move through it? Well, getting professional support in some form is really good, and it's a lot more accessible in New Zealand than it ever has been before. And so that can help sort of process things emotionally and work through that experience in a safe place, but also learning specific skills to cope, dealing with things like avoidance. There's a lot of research to suggest the benefit of support groups if that's something that fits with who you are, and that not feeling alone, because that's half of the experience, that you think you're the only person in the world that may think or feel that way. Having a shared experience, but also hearing about what other things that people may do or have worked for them. Also to think about the things that we can do with staff, because as we've talked, staff can have a lot of influence in this space. And so thinking about healthcare professionals thinking about in a collaborative, person-centred way. And what I think is really good is that at the moment the Ministry of Health are working on what we call person-centred standards of care, which actually mean that you are in the centre of care, not beside the health professionals are not the centre, you are the centre, and that is a massive difference. I think it's really important to think, though, that caregiver trauma is also a very real thing. But right at the beginning, we talked about it's also there as a witness too. And so the things that I've talked about today aren't just about the person sort of with the diagnosis, they're about a caregiver as well. But it's a lot harder to recognise, but also to acknowledge. So, a take-home message really is that the experience of cancer has many aspects that can make it a traumatic event. It can be a really individual experience and a really individual psychological experience. But I think a really important thing is that certainly not alone with it, and there are some really great things that can help. But actually to think about it and to acknowledge it is a really important thing. So being here today is part of that. So I wonder if any of you have any questions.
Not so much a question as my experience quickly.